that moment in September in which Prime Minister Justin Trudeau alleged agents of the Indian government may be involved in the murder of a Sikh separatist leader on Canadian soil is just one of the notable political moments to happen on Parliament Hill in 2023. With just 1 week left of the year, we're looking back on what's been a busy year in Canadian politics, and who better to help us than the Sunday Strategy Session? They're all here. They're here with their top picks for political stories of 2023. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and director of communications to the late Jack Layton. Corey Tonight was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former director of communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst and former communications director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody.
Hi there.
Very nice to see you. Thanks for convening for this last show of the year. Wouldn't be a special one without you. Scott, I'll start with you. Your pick for the top story of the year.
Top story of the year, I think, is the summer surge by Pierre Poilievre, and I pick it for a couple of reasons. First of all, I mean, it was really the fault line politically, federally in politics, because until sort of July, the major parties really had been neck and neck for a long, long time, and then that tie was broken, and it was broken big time. Poilievre has since gained 10, 15, almost 20-point leads in the polls, fueled by interest rate hikes, fueled by people's anxiety about the economy, fueled by perhaps an inexact response from the federal government, and certainly fueled by a failure of the government to define their opponent, even as he was putting in millions of dollars into ads, telling people that he was a friendly family man. And I just think that has really reshaped not just the politics of the here and now, but probably the politics of 2024 and possibly 2025, if indeed that's when the next election is.
I'll ask for your pick in a second, Corey, but if we had been convened at this time last year, do you think anyone would have predicted the degree to which that summer surge did end up happening for the Tories?
I think it was a lot bigger than most people would have predicted, and probably than I would have predicted at the time. I think that what's driving it, I think Scott's already put his finger on it. I think it's focused around the economy and interest rates. Certainly those bread and butter issues work better for them than talking about Chinese electoral interference in the spring. I think that was a little disconnected from regular folks. But the really big thing was the advertising campaign. They clearly spent a lot of time coming up with exactly the right messaging and creative around those ads that really presented Poilievre in a way that was very helpful with those voters that hadn't been with him up until that point.
And your pick for the biggest story of the year?
My pick for the biggest story is the reversal on the carbon tax in Atlantic Canada for home heating fuel. I think that was perhaps the greatest gift that the Liberals could have given the Conservative Party. It really took an argument that Poilievre was getting some traction making around tying the carbon tax to affordability, and basically just gave up the argument in its entirety and said, actually he's right. And how are they saying he's right? Well, they reversed it on the basis of affordability. So they abandoned, I think, like a major policy, not a complete abandonment, but a partial one. But more importantly, they gave up the point at the center of it and conceded that, what I think most Canadians were already suspecting, that the carbon tax is not being good for affordability.
And what's interesting is, since then, Kathleen, despite the fact that the Prime Minister, in making that announcement, was surrounded by MPs from Atlantic Canada who had fiercely lobbied him to do exactly that, they have really tried to say, we're never budging again, that that policy is as important as we said it was before this. We're going to keep on keeping on. Your take on how that all unfolded, and then your pick for the year.
Yeah, I think actually it makes people a bit cynical about politics. It's always a Liberal policy and it's ours, until it's not, until we change. And it was a bit of, it harkens back to kind of Liberal brokerage politics that they've done in the past. And I think it really made people bitter this fall. Don't get me wrong, I think there are some really good aspects to what they're doing in terms of energy affordability and that kind of stuff, in terms of the home heat pumps and getting those into those areas that need them the most. But it does make people really cynical about politics. My pick on what was the top story of 2023 was the one that never left the headlines. It was the affordability story, right? So whether that's affordability on housing or affordability on groceries, it dominated, never left the headlines from the beginning of the year to the end. And that's because it made Canadians really frustrated to see those prices at the grocery store just keep on ticking up. Jim Stanford, the economist, says that actually grocery store profits will be up $6 billion this year. That's a record. And so it also made the grocery store CEOs an easy villain. And they were called onto the mat 3 times this year, leader come up to Parliament, testify in front of committees. Pretty unusual tactic. And also we saw one of the big CEOs, the biggest one of all, Galen Weston, actually resign earlier this year. So I think it was a big story, mainly because it hit people in the pocketbooks, and that was what mattered. And they called their political representatives to act on it.
I think he remains on the board there, but he resigned as
on the board,
from CEO.
But no longer CEO.
I just have time for one quick final round, and I wanted to jump off the points all of you made, and in particular, when you look at the Tories kind of moving ahead of the pack, Scott, you have been like beating the drum for the Liberals for months now, for the Liberals to better frame Pierre Poilievre, and to do so by spending some money that they've fundraised. They have yet to do so. Do you anticipate they will, though?
I really don't know. And the reason I say that I don't know is that it was so logical, it was so obvious, it was so, I think, necessary for them to have done so in 2023. So will they do so in 2024? Not understanding why they failed to do so this past year, it's hard to predict what they'll do next. But I believe it won't be as potent. He's got some mover advantage because he has defined himself, but I believe it's absolutely necessary. I think they should be putting millions into paid media. If they don't have the money, I would get out the tin cup, I'd wander the streets, I'd beg, I'd do anything to get that money, because they've got to bring his negatives up and they've got to bring him back to earth if they want to be competitive whenever the next election is.
Corey, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think when you're a government that's this long in the tooth, you're not really likely to be reelected out of some huge love for your government, and that people are looking at you and feeling warm, fuzzy, optimistic thoughts about the future. You generally win re-election by making the other choice somebody that you can't accept as an option. And that's why you tend to see very negative ad campaigns in governments that are a little longer in the tooth. We saw one earlier this year in the province of Manitoba, for instance. Didn't end up working out for the incumbents, but it ended up being a lot closer than it otherwise would have been.
They started certainly through trying, through earned media, through more press conferences in the last few weeks, through more interviews on the subject, like more, a few ads on Facebook, that kind of thing, Kathleen, but not a big buy that would even come near comparing to what happened in the summer with the Conservatives.
No, for sure. And that's why Poilievre can be lauded in some way for not stepping into that trap that previous leaders have by not actually getting out there first. He has first mover advantage. He moved quickly. Speed is one of the things that works well in politics. You move quickly, you kind of get out there, you define your opponent. He checks on all those boxes. But the Liberals may be playing a game where they're seeing if, there's a chance that Poilievre might step into a trap himself. That said, I think that's good advice, sound advice to get out there. Potentially the Liberals could also leave it up to other third parties, other independents who could go out there and get on the ice and actually beat up the contendant before they do themselves.
Okay, I wish we had more time to predict what they're going to do, but we'll have to wait and see for 2024.